City. Astounding, May. By Clifford D. Simak. Gramp Stevens sat in a lawn chair, watching the mower at work, feeling the warm, soft sunshine seep into his bones. The mower reached the edge of the lawn, clucked to itself like a contented hen, made a neat turn, and trundled down another swath. The bag holding the clippings bulged. Suddenly, the mower stopped and clicked excitedly. A panel in its side snapped open, and a crane-like arm reached out. Grasping steel fingers fished around in the grass, came up triumphantly with the stone clutched tightly, dropped the stone into a small container, disappeared back into the panel again. The lawnmower gurgled, purred on, following its swath. Gramp grumbled at it with suspicion. "Someday," he told himself, "that dad-burned thing is going to miss a lick and have a nervous breakdown." He lay back in the chair and stared up at the sun-washed sky. A helicopter skimmed far overhead. From somewhere inside the house, a radio came to life and a torturing clash of music poured out. Gramp, hearing it, shivered and hunkered lower in the chair. Young Charlie was settling down for a twitch session. Dad burn the kid. The lawnmower chuckled past, and Gramp squinted at it maliciously. "Automatic," he told the sky. "Every blasted thing is automatic now. Getting so you just take a machine off in a corner and whisper in its ear and it scurries off to do the job." His daughter's voice came to him out the window, pitched to carry above the music. "Father!" Gramp stirred uneasily. "Yes, Betty." "Now, Father, you see you move when that lawnmower gets to you. Don't try to outstubborn it. After all, it's only a machine. Last time you just sat there and made it cut around you. I never saw the beat of you." He didn't answer, letting his head nod a bit, hoping she would think he was asleep and let him be. "Father!" she shrilled. "Did you hear me?" He saw it was no good. "Sure, I heard you," he told her. "I was just fixing to move." He rose slowly to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. Might make her feel sorry for the way she treated him when she saw how old and feeble he was getting. He'd have to be careful, though. If she knew he didn't need the cane at all, she'd be finding jobs for him to do. And on the other hand, if he laid it on too thick, she'd be having that fool doctor in to pester him again. Grumbling, he moved the chair out into that portion of the lawn that had been cut. The mower, rolling past, chortled at him fiendishly. "Someday," Gramp told it, "I'm going to take a swipe at you and bust a gear or two." The mower hooted at him and went serenely down the lawn. From somewhere down the grassy street came a jangling of metal, a stuttered coughing. Gramp, ready to sit down, straightened up and listened. The sound came more clearly, the rumbling backfire of a bulky engine, the clatter of loose metallic parts. "An automobile!" yelped Gramp. "An automobile, by cracky!" He started to gallop for the gate, suddenly remembered that he was feeble, and subsided to a rapid hobble. "Must be that crazy Ole Johnson," he told himself. "He's the only one left that's got a car. Just too dad-burned stubborn to give it up." It was Ole. Gramp reached the gate in time to see the rusty, dilapidated old machine come bumping around the corner, rocking and chugging along the unused street. Steam hissed from the overheated radiator, and a cloud of blue smoke issued from the exhaust, which had lost its muffler 5 years or more ago. Ole sat stolidly behind the wheel, squinting, trying to duck the roughest places, although that was hard to do, for weeds and grass had overrun the streets, and it was hard to see what might be underneath them. Gramp waved his cane. "Hi, Ole," he shouted. Ole pulled up, setting the emergency brake. The car gasped, shuddered, coughed, died with a horrible sigh. "What you burning?" asked Gramp. "Little bit of everything," said Ole. "Kerosene, some old tractor oil I found out in a barrel, some rubbing alcohol." Gramp regarded the fugitive machine with forthright admiration. "Them was the days," he said. "Had one myself. Used to be able to do 100 miles an hour." "Still okay," said Ole. "If you could only find the stuff to run them or get the parts to fix them. Up to 3-4 years ago, I used to be able to get enough gasoline, but ain't seen none for a long time now. Quit making it, I guess. No use having gasoline, they tell me, when you have atomic power." "Sure," said Gramp. "Guess maybe that's right, but you can't smell atomic power. Sweetest thing I know, the smell of burning gasoline. These here helicopters and other gadgets they got took all the romance out of traveling somehow." He squinted at the barrels and baskets piled in the back seat. "Got some vegetables?" he asked. "Yep," said Ole. "Some sweet corn and early potatoes and a few baskets of tomatoes. Thought maybe I could sell them." Gramp shook his head. "You won't, Ole. They won't buy them. Folks has got the notion that this new hydroponic stuff is the only garden sass that's fit to eat. Sanitary, they say, and better flavored. Wouldn't give a hoot in a tin cup for all they grow in them tanks they got," Ole declared belligerently. "Don't taste right to me somehow. Like I tell Martha, food's got to be raised in the soil to have any character." He reached down to turn over the ignition switch. "Don't know as it's worth trying to get the stuff to town," he said. "The way they keep the roads, or the way they don't keep them, rather. 20 years ago, the state highway out there was a strip of good concrete, and they kept it patched and plowed it every winter. Did anything, spent any amount of money to keep it open. And now they just forgot about it. The concrete's all broken up, and some of it is washed out. Brambles are growing in it. I had to get out and cut away a tree that fell across at one place this morning." "Ain't it the truth?" agreed Gramp. The car exploded into life, coughing and choking. A cloud of dense blue smoke rolled out from under it. With a jerk, it stirred to life and lumbered down the street. Gramp clumped back to his chair and found it dripping wet. The automatic mower, having finished its cutting job, had rolled out the hose, was sprinkling the lawn. Muttering venom, Gramp stalked around the corner of the house and sat down on the bench beside the back porch. He didn't like to sit there, but it was the only place he was safe from the hunk of machinery out in front. For one thing, the view from the bench was slightly depressing, fronting as it did on street after street of vacant, deserted houses and weed-grown, unkempt yards. It had one advantage, however. From the bench, he could pretend he was slightly deaf and not hear the twitch music the radio was blaring out. A voice called from the front yard. "Bill? Bill, where be you?" Gramp twisted around. "Here I am, Mark, back of the house, hiding from that dad-burned mower." Mark Bailey limped around the corner of the house, cigarette threatening to set fire to his bushy whiskers. "Bit early for the game, ain't you?" asked Gramp. "Can't play no game today," said Mark. He hobbled over and sat down beside Gramp on the bench. "We're leaving," he said. Gramp whirled on him. "You're leaving?" "Yeah, moving out into the country. Lucinda finally talked Herb into it. Never gave him a minute's peace, I guess. Said everyone was moving away to one of them nice country estates, and she didn't see no reason why we couldn't." Gramp gulped. "Where to?" "Don't rightly know," said Mark. "Ain't been there myself. Up north someplace. Up on one of the lakes. Got 10 acres of land. Lucinda wanted 100, but Herb put down his foot and said 10 was enough. After all, one city lot was enough for all these years." "Bet he was pestering Johnny, too," said Gramp. "But he's holding out against her. Says he simply can't do it. Says it wouldn't look right, him the secretary of the Chamber of Commerce and all, if he went moving away from the city." "Folks are crazy," Mark declared. "Plumb crazy." "That's a fact," Gramp agreed. "Country crazy, that's what they are. Look across there." He waved his hand at the streets of vacant houses. "Can remember the time when those places were as pretty a bunch of homes as you ever laid your eyes on. Good neighbors they were. Women ran across from one back door to another to trade recipes, and the men folks would go out to cut the grass, and pretty soon the mowers would all be sitting idle, and the men would be ganged up chewing the fat. Friendly people, Mark. But look at it now." Mark stirred uneasily. "Got to be getting back, Bill. Just sneaked over to let you know we were lighting out. Lucinda's got me packing. She'd be sore if she knew I'd run out." Gramp rose stiffly and held out his hand. "I'll be seeing you again? You be over for one last game?" Mark shook his head. "Afraid not, Bill." They shook hands awkwardly, abashed. "Sure will miss them games," said Mark. "Me too," said Gramp. "I won't have nobody once you're gone." "So long, Bill," said Mark. "So long," said Gramp. He stood and watched his friend hobble around the house, felt the cold claw of loneliness reach out and touch him with icy fingers. A terrible loneliness. The loneliness of age and the outdated. Fiercely, Gramp admitted it. He was outdated. He belonged to another age. He had outstripped his time, lived beyond his years. Eyes misty, he fumbled for the cane that lay against the bench, slowly made his way toward the sagging gate that opened onto the deserted street back of the house. The years had moved too fast, years that had brought the family plane and helicopter, leaving the auto to rust in some forgotten place, the unused roads to fall into disrepair. Years that had virtually wiped out the tilling of the soil with the rise of hydroponics. Years that had brought cheap land with the disappearance of the farm as an economic unit, had sent city people scurrying out into the country where each man, for less than the price of a city lot, might own broad acres. Years that had revolutionized the construction of homes to a point where families simply walked away from their old homes to the new ones that could be bought, custom-made, for less than half the price of a pre-war structure and could be changed at small cost to accommodate need of additional space or just a passing whim. Gramps sniffed. Houses that could be changed each year, just like one would shift around the furniture. What kind of living was that? He plodded slowly down the dusty path that was all that remained of what a few years before had been a busy residential street. A street of ghosts, Gramp told himself. Of furtive little ghosts that whispered in the night. Ghosts of playing children. Ghosts of upset tricycles and canted coaster wagons. Ghosts of gossiping housewives. Ghosts of shouted greetings. Ghosts of flaming fireplaces and chimneys smoking of a winter night. Little puffs of dust rose around his feet and whitened the cuffs of his trousers. There was the old Adams place across the way. Adams had been mighty proud of it, he remembered. Gray fieldstone front and picture windows. Now the stone was green with creeping moss, and the broken windows gaped with ghastly leer. Weeds choked the lawn and blotted out the stoop. An elm tree was pushing its branches against the gable. Gramp could remember the day Adams had planted that elm tree. For a moment he stood there in the grass-grown street, feet in the dust, both hands clutching the curve of his cane, eyes closed. Through the fog of years he heard the cry of playing children, the barking of Conrad's yapping pooch from down the street. And there was Adams, stripped to the waist, plying the shovel, scooping out the hole with the elm tree, roots wrapped in burlap, lying on the lawn. May 1946, 44 years ago, just after he and Adams had come home from the war together. Footsteps padded in the dust, and Gramp, startled, opened his eyes. Before him stood a young man, a man of 30, perhaps, maybe a bit less. "Good morning," said Gramp. "I hope," said the young man, "that I didn't startle you." "You saw me standing here?" asked Gramp, "like a danged fool with my eyes shut?" The young man nodded. "I was remembering," said Gramp. "You live around here?" "Just down the street. The last one in this part of the city." "Perhaps you can help me, then." "Try me," said Gramp. The young man stammered. "Well, you see, it's like this. I'm on a sort of, well, you might call it a sentimental pilgrimage." "I understand," said Gramp. "So am I." "My name is Adams," said the young man. "My grandfather used to live around here somewhere. I wonder—" "Right over there," said Gramp. Together they stood and stared at the house. "It was a nice place once," Gramp told him. "Your granddaddy planted that tree right after he came home from the war. I was with him all through the war, and we came home together. That was a day for you." "It's a pity," said young Adams. "A pity." But Gramp didn't seem to hear him. "Your granddaddy?" he asked. "I seem to have lost track of him." "He's dead," said young Adams. "Quite a number of years ago." "He was messed up with atomic power," said Gramp. "That's right," said Adams proudly. "Got into it just as soon as it was released to industry, right after the Moscow Agreement." "Right after they decided," said Gramp, "they couldn't fight a war." "That's right," said Adams. "It's pretty hard to fight a war," said Gramp, "when there's nothing you can aim at." "You mean the cities," said Adams. "Sure," said Gramp. "And there's a funny thing about it. Wave all the atom bombs you wanted to and you couldn't scare them out. But give them cheap land and family planes and they scattered just like so many dad-burned rabbits." John J. Webster was striding up the broad stone steps of the city hall when the walking scarecrow carrying a rifle under his arm caught up with him and stopped him. "Howdy, Mr. Webster," said the scarecrow. Webster stared, then recognition crinkled his face. "It's Levi," he said. "How are things going, Levi?" Levi Lewis grinned with snagged teeth. "Fair to middling. Gardens are coming along, and the young rabbits are getting to be good eating." "You aren't getting mixed up in any of the hell-raising that's being laid to the houses?" asked Webster. "No, sir," declared Levi. "Ain't none of us squatters mixed up in any wrongdoing. We're law-abiding, God-fearing people, we are. Only reason we're there is we can't make a living no place else. And us living in them places, other people up and left ain't harming no one. Police are just blaming us for the thievery and other things that's going on, knowing we can't protect ourselves. They're making us the goats." "I'm glad to hear that," said Webster. "The chief wants to burn the houses." "If he tries that," said Levi, "he'll run against something he ain't counting on. They run us off our farms with this tank farming of theirs, but they ain't going to run us any farther." He spat across the steps. "Wouldn't happen you might have some jingling money on you?" he asked. "I'm fresh out of cartridges, and with them rabbits coming up—" Webster thrust his fingers into a vest pocket, pulled out a $50. Levi grinned. "That's obliging of you, Mr. Webster. I'll bring a mess of squirrels come fall." The squatter touched his hat with 2 fingers and retreated down the steps, sun glinting on the rifle barrel. Webster turned up the steps again. The city council session already was in full swing when he walked into the chamber. Police Chief Jim Maxwell was standing by the table, and Mayor Paul Carter was talking. "Don't you think you may be acting a bit hastily, Jim, in urging such a course of action with the houses?" "No, I don't," declared the chief. "Except for a couple of dozen or so, none of those houses are occupied by their rightful owners, or rather their original owners. Every one of them belongs to the city now through tax forfeiture. And they are nothing but an eyesore and a menace. They have no value, not even salvage value. Wood? We don't use wood anymore. Plastics are better. Stone? We use steel instead of stone. Not a single one of those houses has any material of marketable value. And in the meantime, they are becoming the haunts of petty criminals and undesirable elements. Grown up with vegetation, as the residential sections are, they make a perfect hideout for all types of criminals. A man commits a crime and heads straight for the houses. Once there, he's safe, for I could send 1,000 men in there and he could elude them all. They aren't worth the expense of tearing down, and yet they are, if not a menace, at least a nuisance. We should get rid of them, and fire is the cheapest, quickest way. We'd use all precautions." "What about the legal angle?" asked the mayor. "I checked into that. A man has a right to destroy his own property in any way he may see fit, so long as it endangers no one else's. The same law, I suppose, would apply to a municipality." Alderman Thomas Griffin sprang to his feet. "You'd alienate a lot of people," he declared. "You'd be burning down a lot of old homesteads. People still have some sentimental attachments." "If they cared for them," snapped the chief, "why didn't they pay the taxes and take care of them? Why did they go running off to the country, just leaving the houses standing? Ask Webster here. He can tell you what success he had trying to interest the people in their ancestral homes." "You're talking about that old Home Week farce," said Griffin. "It failed. Of course it failed. Webster spread it on so thick that they gagged on it. That's what a Chamber of Commerce mentality always does." Alderman Forrest King spoke up angrily. "There's nothing wrong with the Chamber of Commerce, Griffin. Simply because you failed in business is no reason—" Griffin ignored him. "The day of high pressure is over, gentlemen. The day of high pressure is gone forever. Ballyhoo is something that is dead and buried. The day when you could have tall corn days or dollar days or dream up some fake celebration and deck the place up with bunting and pull in big crowds that were ready to spend money is past these many years. Only you fellows don't seem to know it. The success of such stunts as that was its appeal to mob psychology and civic loyalty. You can't have civic loyalty with the city dying on its feet. You can't appeal to mob psychology when there is no mob, when every man, or nearly every man, has the solitude of 40 acres. "Gentlemen," pleaded the mayor, "gentlemen, this is distinctly out of order." King sputtered into life, walloped the table. "No, let's have it out. Webster is over there. Perhaps he can tell us what he thinks." Webster stirred uncomfortably. "I scarcely believe," he said, "I have anything to say." "Forget it," snapped Griffin and sat down. But King still stood, face crimson, his mouth trembling with anger. "Webster!" he shouted. Webster shook his head. "You came here with one of your big ideas," shouted King. "You were going to lay it before the council. Step up, man, and speak your piece." Webster rose slowly, grim-lipped. "Perhaps you're too thick-skulled," he told King, "to know why I resent the way you have behaved.
King gasped, then exploded. "Thick-skulled? You would say that to me. We've worked together, and I've helped you. You've never called me that before. "I've never called you that before," said Webster levelly. "Naturally not. I wanted to keep my job." "Well, you haven't got a job," roared King. "From this minute on, you haven't got a job." "Shut up," said Webster. King stared at him, bewildered, as if someone had slapped him across the face. "And sit down," said Webster, and his voice bit through the room like a sharp-edged knife. King's knees caved beneath him, and he sat down abruptly. The silence was brittle. "I have something to say," said Webster. "Something that should have been said long ago. Something all of you should hear. That I should be the one who would tell it to you is the one thing that astounds me. And yet perhaps as one who has worked in the interests of this city for almost 15 years, I am the logical one to speak the truth. Alderman Griffin said the city is dying on its feet, and his statement is correct. There is but one fault I would find with it, and that is its understatement. The city, this city, any city, already is dead. The city is an anachronism. It has outlived its usefulness. Hydroponics and the helicopter spelled its downfall. In the first instance, the city was a tribal place, an area where the tribe banded together for mutual protection. In later years, a wall was thrown around it for additional protection. Then the wall finally disappeared, but the city lived on because of the conveniences which it offered trade and commerce. It continued into modern times because people were compelled to live close to their jobs, and the jobs were in the city. But today that is no longer true. With the family plane, 100 miles today is a shorter distance than 5 miles back in 1930. Men can fly several hundred miles to work and fly home when the day is done. There is no longer any need for them to live cooped up in a city. The automobile started the trend, and the family plane finished it. Even in the first part of the century, the trend was noticeable, a movement away from the city with its taxes and its stuffiness, a move toward the suburb and close-in acreages. Lack of adequate transportation, lack of finances held many to the city. But now, with tank farming destroying the value of land, a man can buy a huge acreage in the country for less than he could a city lot 40 years ago. With planes powered by atomics, there is no longer any transportation problem. He paused, and the silence held. The mayor wore a shocked look. King's lips moved, but no words came. Griffin was smiling. "So what have we?" asked Webster. "I'll tell you what we have. Street after street, block after block of deserted houses, houses that the people just up and walked away from. Why should they have stayed? What could the city offer them? None of the things that it offered the generations before them, for progress had wiped out the need of the city's benefits. They lost something, some monetary consideration, of course, when they left the houses, but the fact that they could buy a house twice as good for half as much, the fact that they could live as they wished to live, that they could develop what amounts to family estates after the best traditions set them by the wealthy of a generation ago, all these things outweighed the leaving of their homes. And what have we left? A few blocks of business houses, a few acres of industrial plants, a city government geared to take care of 1 million people without the 1 million people, a budget that has run the taxes so high that eventually even business houses will move to escape those taxes. Tax forfeitures that have left us loaded with worthless property. That's what we have left. If you think any chamber of commerce, any ballyhoo, any harebrained scheme will give you the answers, you're crazy. There is only one answer, and that is simple. The city as a human institution is dead. It may struggle on a few more years, but that is all. "Mr. Webster," said the mayor. But Webster paid him no attention. "But for what happened today," he said, "I would have stayed on and played dollhouse with you. I would have gone on pretending that the city was a going concern, would have gone on kidding myself and you. But there is, gentlemen, such a thing as human dignity." The icy silence broke down in the rustling of papers, the muffled cough of some embarrassed listener. But Webster was not through. "The city failed," he said, "and it is well it failed. Instead of sitting here in mourning above its broken body, you should rise to your feet and shout your thanks it failed. For if this city had not outlived its usefulness, as did every other city, if the cities of the world had not been deserted, they would have been destroyed. There would have been a war, gentlemen, an atomic war. Have you forgotten the 1950s and the 60s? Have you forgotten waking up at night and listening for the bomb to come, knowing that you would not hear it when it came, knowing that you would never hear again if it did come? But the cities were deserted and industry was dispersed, and there were no targets, and there was no war. Some of you, gentlemen, he said, many of you, gentlemen, are alive today because the people left your city. Now, for God's sake, let it stay dead. Be happy that it's dead. It's the best thing that ever happened in all human history. John J. Webster turned on his heel and left the room. Outside on the broad stone steps, he stopped and stared up at the cloudless sky, saw the pigeons wheeling above the turrets and spires of the city hall. He shook himself mentally like a dog coming out of a pool. He had been a fool, of course. Now he'd have to hunt for a job, and it might take time to find one. He was getting a bit old to be hunting for a job. But despite his thoughts, a little tune rose unbidden to his lips. He walked away, briskly, lips pursed, whistling soundlessly. No more hypocrisy. No more lying awake nights wondering what to do, knowing that the city was dead, knowing that what he did was a useless task, feeling like a heel for taking a salary that he knew he wasn't earning. Sensing the strange, nagging frustration of a worker who knows his work is non-productive. He strode toward the parking lot, heading for his helicopter. Now, maybe, he told himself, they could move out into the country the way Betty wanted to. Maybe he could spend his evenings tramping land that belonged to him. A place with a stream. Definitely it had to have a stream he could stock with trout. He made a mental note to go up into the attic and check his fly equipment. Martha Johnson was waiting at the barnyard gate when the old car chugged down the lane. Ole got out stiffly, face rimmed with weariness. "Sell anything?" asked Martha. Ole shook his head. "It ain't no use. They won't buy farm-raised stuff. Just laughed at me. Showed me ears of corn twice as big as the ones I had, just as sweet and with more even rows. Showed me melons that had almost no rind at all. Better tasting, too, they said." He kicked at a clod, and it exploded into dust. "There ain't no getting around it," he declared. "Tank farming has ruined us." "Maybe we better fix to sell the farm," suggested Martha. Ole said nothing. "You could get a job on a tank farm," she said. "Harry did. Likes it real well." Ole shook his head. "Or maybe a gardener," said Martha. "You would make a right smart gardener. Ritzy folks that's moved out to big estates like to have gardeners to take care of flowers and things. More classy than doing it with machines." Ole shook his head again. "Couldn't stand to mess around with flowers," he declared. "Not after raising corn for more than 20 years. "Maybe," said Martha, "we could have one of them little planes, and running water in the house, and a bathtub instead of taking a bath in the old washtub by the kitchen fire." "Couldn't run a plane," objected Ole. "Sure you could," said Martha. "Simple to run they are. Why, them Anderson kids ain't no more than knee-high to a cricket, and they fly one all over. One of them got fooling around and fell out once, but—" "I got to think about it," said Ole desperately. "I got to think." He swung away, vaulted a fence, headed for the fields. Martha stood beside the car and watched him go. One lone tear rolled down her dusty cheek. "Mr. Taylor is waiting for you," said the girl. John J. Webster stammered. "But I haven't been here before. He didn't know I was coming." "Mr. Taylor," insisted the girl, "is waiting for you." She nodded her head toward the door. It read, "Bureau of Human Adjustment." "But I came here to get a job," protested Webster. "I didn't come to be adjusted or anything. This is the World Committee's placement service, isn't it?" "That is right," the girl declared. "Won't you see Mr. Taylor?" "Since you insist," said Webster. The girl clicked over a switch, spoke into the intercommunicator. "Mr. Webster is here, sir." "Send him in," said a voice. Hat in hand, Webster walked through the door. The man behind the desk had white hair, but a young man's face. He motioned toward a chair. "You've been trying to find a job," he said. "Yes," said Webster, "but—" "Please, sit down," said Taylor. "If you're thinking about that sign on the door, forget it. We'll not try to adjust you." "I couldn't find a job," said Webster. "I've hunted for weeks and no one would have me, so finally I came here." "You didn't want to come here?" "No, frankly I didn't. A placement service. It has an implication I do not like." Taylor smiled. "The terminology may be unfortunate. You were thinking of the employment services of the old days, the places where men went when they were desperate for work. The government-operated places that tried to find work for men so they wouldn't become public charges. I'm desperate enough, confessed Webster, but I still have a pride that made it hard to come. But finally there was nothing else to do. You see, I turned traitor. You mean, said Taylor, that you told the truth, even when it cost you your job. The business world, not only here, but all over the world, is not ready for that truth. The businessman still clings to the city myth, to the myth of salesmanship. In time to come, he will realize he doesn't need the city, that service and honest values will bring him more substantial business than salesmanship ever did. I've wondered, Webster, just what made you do what you did. I was sick of it, said Webster, sick of watching men blundering along with their eyes tight shut, sick of seeing an old tradition being kept alive when it should have been laid away. Sick of King's simpering civic enthusiasm when all cause for enthusiasm had vanished. Taylor nodded. Webster, do you think you could adjust human beings? Webster merely stared. I mean it, said Taylor. The World Committee has been doing it for years, quietly, unobtrusively. Even many of the people who have been adjusted don't know they have been adjusted. Changes such as have come since the creation of the World Committee out of the old United Nations has meant much human maladjustment. The advent of workable atomic power took jobs away from hundreds of thousands. They had to be trained and guided into new jobs, some with the new atomics, some into other lines of work. The advent of tank farming swept the farmers off their land. They, perhaps, have supplied us with our greatest problem, for other than the special knowledge needed to grow crops and handle animals, they had no skills. Most of them had no wish for acquiring skills. Most of them were bitterly resentful at having been forced from the livelihood which they inherited from their forebears. And, being natural individualists, they offered the toughest psychological problems of any other class. Many of them, declared Webster, still are at loose ends. There's 100 or more of them squatting out in the houses, living from hand to mouth, shooting a few rabbits and a few squirrels, doing some fishing, raising vegetables and picking wild fruit, engaging in a little petty thievery now and then, and doing occasional begging on the uptown streets. You know these people? Asked Taylor. I know some of them, said Webster. One of them brings me squirrels and rabbits on occasions. To make up for it, he bums ammunition money. They'd resent being adjusted, wouldn't they? Violently, said Webster. You know a farmer by the name of Ole Johnson, still sticking to his farm, still unreconstructed? Webster nodded. What if you tried to adjust him? He'd run me off the farm, said Webster. Men like Ole and the squatters, said Taylor, are our special problems now. Most of the rest of the world is fairly well adjusted, fairly well settled into the groove of the present. Some of them are doing a lot of moaning about the past, but that's just for effect. You couldn't drive them back to their old ways of life. Years ago, with the advent of industrial atomics, in fact, the World Committee faced a hard decision. Should changes that spelled progress in the world be brought about gradually to allow the people to adjust themselves naturally, or should they be developed as quickly as possible, with the committee aiding in the necessary human adjustment? It was decided, rightly or wrongly, that progress should come first, regardless of its effect upon the people. The decision in the main has proved a wise one. We knew, of course, that in many instances this readjustment could not be made too openly. In some cases, as in large groups of workers who had been displaced, it was possible, but in most individual cases, such as our friend Ole, it was not. These people must be helped to find themselves in this new world, but they must not know that they're being helped. To let them know would destroy confidence and dignity, and human dignity is the keystone of any civilization. I knew, of course, about the readjustments made within industry itself, said Webster, but I had not heard of the individual cases. We could not advertise it, Taylor said. It's practically undercover. But why are you telling me all this now? Because we'd like you to come in with us. Have a hand at adjusting Ole to start with. Maybe see what could be done about the squatters next. I don't know, said Webster. We'd been waiting for you to come in, said Taylor. We knew you'd finally have to come here. Any chance you might have had at any kind of job would have been queered by King. He passed the word along. You're blackballed by every chamber of commerce and every civic group in the world today. Probably I have no choice, said Webster. We don't want you to feel that way about it, Taylor said. Take a while to think it over, then come back. Even if you don't want the job, we'll find you another one, in spite of King. Outside the office, Webster found a scarecrow figure waiting for him. It was Levi Lewis, snaggle-toothed grin wiped off, rifle under his arm. Some of the boys said they seen you go in here, he explained, so I waited for you. What's the trouble? Webster asked, for Levi's face spoke eloquently of trouble. It's them police, said Levi. He spat disgustedly. The police, said Webster, and his heart sank as he said the words, for he knew what the trouble was. Yeah, said Levi. They're fixing to burn us out. So the council finally gave in, said Webster. I just came from police headquarters, declared Levi. I told them they better go easy. I told them there'd be guts strewed all over the place if they tried it. I got the boys posted all around the place with orders not to shoot till they're sure of hitting. You can't do that, Levi, said Webster sharply. I can't, retorted Levi. I've done it already. They drove us off the farms, forced us to sell because we couldn't make a living, and they aren't driving us no farther. We either stay here or we die here. And the only way they'll burn us out is when there's no one left to stop them. He shucked up his pants and spat again. And we ain't the only ones that feel that way, he declared. Gramp is out there with us. Gramp? Sure, Gramp, the old guy that lives with you. He's sort of taken over as our commanding general. Says he remembers tricks from the war them police have never heard of. He sent some of the boys over to one of them Legion halls to swipe a cannon. Says he knows where we can get some shells for it from the museum. Says we'll get it all set up, and then send word that if the police make a move, we'll shell the loop. Look, Levi, will you do something for me? Sure will, Mr. Webster. Will you go in and ask for a Mr. Taylor? Insist on seeing him. Tell him I'm already on the job. Sure will, but where are you going? I'm going up to the city hall. Sure you don't want me along? No, declared Webster. I'll do better alone. And Levi. Yes? Tell Gramp to hold up his artillery. Don't shoot unless he has to, but if he has, to lay it on the line. The mayor is busy, said Raymond Brown, his secretary. That's what you think, said Webster, starting for the door. You can't go in there, Webster, yelled Brown. He leaped from his chair, came charging around the desk, reaching for Webster. Webster swung broadside with his arm, caught Brown across the chest, swept him back against the desk. The desk skidded, and Brown waved his arms, lost his balance, thudded to the floor. Webster jerked open the mayor's door. The mayor's feet thumped off his desk. I told Brown, he said. Webster nodded. And Brown told me. What's the matter, Carter? Afraid King might find out I was here? Afraid of being corrupted by some good ideas? What do you want? Snapped Carter. I understand the police are going to burn the houses. That's right, declared the mayor righteously. They're a menace to the community. What community? Look here, Webster. You know there's no community. Just a few of you lousy politicians who stick around so you can claim residence, so you can be sure of being elected every year and drag down your salaries. It's getting to the point where all you have to do is vote for one another. The people who work in the stores and shops, even those who do the meanest jobs in the factories, don't live inside the city limits. The businessmen quit the city long ago. They do business here, but they aren't residents. But this is still a city, declared the mayor. I didn't come to argue that with you, said Webster. I came to try to make you see that you're doing wrong by burning those houses. Even if you don't realize it, the houses are homes to people who have no other homes. People who have come to this city to seek sanctuary, who have found refuge with us. In a measure, they are our responsibility. They're not our responsibility, gritted the mayor. Whatever happens to them is their own hard luck. We didn't ask them here. We don't want them here. They contribute nothing to the community. You're going to tell me they're misfits. Well, can I help that? You're going to say they can't find jobs. And I'll tell you they could find jobs if they tried to find them. There's work to be done. There's always work to be done. They've been filled up with this new world talk, and they figure it's up to someone to find the place that suits them and the job that suits them. You sound like a rugged individualist, said Webster. You say that like you think it's funny, yapped the mayor. I do think it's funny, said Webster. Funny and tragic that anyone should think that way today. The world would be a lot better off with some rugged individualism, snapped the mayor. Look at the men who have gone places. Meaning yourself? Asked Webster. You might take me, for example, Carter agreed. I worked hard. I took advantage of opportunity. I had some foresight. I did... You mean you licked the correct boots and stepped in the proper faces, said Webster. You're the shining example of the kind of people the world doesn't want today. You positively smell musty. Your ideas are so old. You're the last of the politicians, Carter, just as I was the last of the Chamber of Commerce secretaries. Only you don't know it yet. I did. I got out. Even when it cost me something, I got out, because I had to save my self-respect. Your kind of politics is dead. They're dead because any tin horn with a loud mouth and a brassy front could gain power by appeal to mob psychology. And you haven't got mob psychology anymore. You can't have mob psychology when people don't give a damn what happens to a thing that's dead already, a political system that broke down under its own weight. "Get out of here!" screamed Carter. "Get out before I have the cops come and throw you out." "You forget," said Webster, "that I came in to talk about the houses." "It won't do you any good," snarled Carter. "You can stand and talk till doomsday for all the good it does. Those houses burn. That's final." "How would you like to see the Loop a mass of rubble?" asked Webster. "Your comparison," said Carter, "is grotesque." "I wasn't talking about comparisons," said Webster. "You weren't?" The mayor stared at him. "What were you talking about, then?" "Only this," said Webster. "The second the first torch touches the houses, the first shell will land on the City Hall, and the second one will hit the First National. They'll go down the line, the biggest targets first." Carter gaped. Then a flush of anger crawled from his throat up into his face. "It won't work, Webster," he snapped. "You can't bluff me. Any cock-and-bull story like that." "It's no cock-and-bull story," declared Webster. "Those men have cannon out there. Pieces from in front of Legion halls, from the museums. And they have men who know how to work them. They wouldn't need them, really. It's practically point-blank range, like shooting the broadside of a barn." Carter reached for the radio, but Webster stopped him with an upraised hand. "Better think a minute, Carter, before you go flying off the handle. You're on a spot. Go ahead with your plan, and you have a battle on your hands. The houses may burn, but the Loop is wrecked. The businessmen will have your scalp for that." Carter's hand retreated from the radio. From far away came the sharp crack of a rifle. "Better call them off," warned Webster. Carter's face twisted with indecision. Another rifle shot, another and another. "Pretty soon," said Webster, "it will have gone too far, so far that you can't stop it." A thudding blast rattled the windows of the room. Carter leaped from his chair. Webster felt suddenly cold and weak, but he fought to keep his face straight and his voice calm. Carter was staring out the window like a man of stone. "I'm afraid," said Webster, "that it's gone too far already." The radio on the desk chirped insistently, red light flashing. Carter reached out a trembling hand and snapped it on. "Carter," a voice was saying. "Carter! Carter!" Webster recognized that voice, the bull-throated tone of Police Chief Jim Maxwell. "What is it?" asked Carter. "They had a big gun," said Maxwell. "It exploded when they tried to fire it. Ammunition no good, I guess." "One gun?" asked Carter. "Only one gun?" "I don't see any others." "I heard rifle fire," said Carter. "Yeah, they did some shooting at us, wounded a couple of the boys. But they've pulled back now, deeper into the brush. No shooting now." "Okay," said Carter. "Go ahead and start the fires." Webster started forward. Ask him... But Carter clicked the switch and the radio went dead. "What was it you want to ask?" "Nothing," said Webster. "Nothing that amounted to anything." He couldn't tell Carter that Gramp had been the one who knew about firing big guns. Couldn't tell him that when the gun exploded, Gramp had been there. He'd have to get out of here, get over to the gun as quickly as possible. "It was a good bluff, Webster," Carter was saying. "A good bluff, but it petered out." The mayor turned to the window that faced toward the houses. "No more firing," he said. "They gave up quick." "You'll be lucky," snapped Webster, "if 6 of your policemen come back alive. Those men with the rifles are out in the brush, and they can pick the eye out of a squirrel at 100 yards. Feet pounded in the corridor outside, 2 pairs of feet racing toward the door. The mayor whirled from his window, and Webster pivoted around. "Gramp!" he yelled. "Hi, Johnny," puffed Gramp, skidding to a stop. The man behind Gramp was a young man, and he was waving something in his hand, a sheaf of papers that rustled as he waved them. "What do you want?" asked the mayor. "Plenty," said Gramp. He stood for a moment, catching back his breath, and said between puffs, "Meet my friend, Henry Adams." "Adams?" asked the mayor. "Sure," said Gramp. "His granddaddy used to live here, out on 27th Street. "Oh," said the mayor, and it was as if someone had smacked him with a brick. "Oh, you mean F.J. Adams?" "Bet your boots," said Gramp. "Him and me, we were in the war together. Used to keep me awake nights telling me about his boy back home." Carter nodded to Henry Adams. "As mayor of the city," he said, trying to regain some of his dignity, "I welcome you to—" "It's not a particularly fitting welcome," Adams said. "I understand you were burning my property." "Your property?" The mayor choked, and his eyes stared in disbelief at the sheaf of papers Adams waved at him. "Yeah, his property," shrilled Gramp. "He just bought it. We just come from the treasurer's office. Paid all the back taxes and penalties and all the other things you legal thieves thought up to slap against them houses." But, the mayor was grasping for words, gasping for breath. "Not all of it. Perhaps just the old Adams property." "Lock, stock, and barrel," said Gramp triumphantly. "And now," said Adams to the mayor, "if you would kindly tell your men to stop destroying my property." Carter bent over the desk and fumbled at the radio, his hands suddenly all thumbs. "Maxwell!" he shouted. "Maxwell! Maxwell!" "What do you want?" Maxwell yelled back. "Stop setting those fires," yelled Carter. "Start putting them out. Call the fire department. Do anything, but stop those fires." "Cripes," said Maxwell. "I wish you'd make up your mind." "You do what I tell you," screamed the mayor. "You put out those fires." "All right," said Maxwell. "All right, keep your shirt on, but the boys won't like it. They won't like getting shot at to do something you change your mind about." Carter straightened from the radio. "Let me assure you, Mr. Adams," he said, "that this is all a big mistake." "It is," Adams declared solemnly. "A very great mistake, Mayor. The biggest one you ever made." For a moment the two of them stood there, looking across the room at one another. "Tomorrow," said Adams, "I shall file a petition with the courts asking dissolution of the city charter. As owner of the greatest portion of the land included in the corporate limits, both from the standpoint of area and valuation, I understand I have a perfect legal right to do that." The mayor gulped, finally brought out some words. "Upon what grounds?" he asked. "Upon the grounds," said Adam, "that there is no further need of it. I do not believe I shall have too hard a time to prove my case." But that means—" "Yeah," said Gramp. "You know what it means. It means you are out right on your ear." "A park," said Gramp, waving his arm over the wilderness that once had been the residential section of the city. "A park so that people can remember how their old folks lived." The three of them stood on Tower Hill, with the rusty old water tower looming above them, its sturdy steel legs planted in a sea of waist-high grass. "Not a park exactly," explained Henry Adams. "A memorial, rather. A memorial to an era of communal life that will be forgotten in another 100 years. A preservation of a number of peculiar types of construction that arose to suit certain conditions and each man's particular tastes. No slavery to any architectural concepts, but an effort made to achieve better living. In another 100 years, men will walk through those houses down there with the same feeling of respect and awe they have when they go into a museum today. It will be to them something out of what amounts to a primeval age, a stepping stone on the way to the better, fuller life. Artists will spend their lives transferring those old houses to their canvases. Writers of historical novels will come here for the breath of authenticity." "But you said you meant to restore all the houses, make the lawns and gardens exactly like they were before," said Webster. "That will take a fortune, and after that another fortune to keep them in shape." "I have too much money," said Adams. "Entirely too much money. Remember, my grandfather and father got into atomics on the ground floor." "Best crap player I ever knew your granddaddy was," said Gramp. "He used to take me for a cleaning every payday." "In the old days," said Adams, "when a man had too much money, there were other things he could do with it. Organized charities, for example, or medical research or something like that. But there are no organized charities today. Not enough business to keep them going. And since the World Committee has hit its stride, there is ample money for all the research, medical or otherwise, anyone might wish to do. I didn't plan this thing when I came back to see my grandfather's old house. Just wanted to see it, that was all. He'd told me so much about it, how he planted the tree in the front lawn, and the rose garden he had out back. And then I saw it, and it was a mocking ghost. It was something that had been left behind, something that had meant a lot to someone and had been left behind. Standing there in front of that house with Gramp that day, it came to me that I could do nothing better than preserve for posterity a cross-section of the life their ancestors lived. A thin blue thread of smoke rose above the trees far below. Webster pointed to it. "What about them?" "The squatters stay," said Adams, "if they want to. There will be plenty of work for them to do, and there'll always be a house or two that they can have to live in. There's just one thing that bothers me. I can't be here all the time myself. I'll need someone to manage the project. It'll be a lifelong job." He looked at Webster. "Go ahead, Johnny," said Gramp. Webster shook his head. "Bet he's got her heart set on that place out in the country." "You wouldn't have to stay here," said Adams. "You could fly in every day." From the foot of the hill came a hail. "It's Ole," yelled Gramp. He waved his cane. "Hi, Ole, come on up." They watched Ole striding up the hill, waiting for him silently. "Wanted to talk to you, Johnny," said Ole. "Got an idea. Waked me out of a sound sleep last night." "Go ahead," said Webster. Ole glanced at Adams. "He's all right," said Webster. "He's Henry Adams. Maybe you remember his grandfather, old F.J." "I remember him," said Ole. "Nuts about atomic power he was. How did he make out?" "He made out rather well," said Adams. "Glad to hear that," Ole said. "Guess I was wrong. Said he never would amount to nothing. Daydreamed all the time." "How about that idea?" Webster asked. "You heard about dude ranches, ain't you?" Ole asked. Webster nodded. "Place," said Ole, "where people used to go and pretend they were cowboys. Pleased them because they really didn't know all the hard work there was in ranching and figured it was romantic-like to ride horses and—" "Look," said Webster, "you aren't figuring on turning your farm into a dude ranch, are you?" "Nope," said Ole. "Not a dude ranch. Dude farm, maybe. Folks don't know too much about farms anymore since there ain't hardly no farms. And they'll read about the frost being on the pumpkin and how pretty a—" Webster stared at Ole. "They'd go for it, Ole," he declared. "They'd kill one another in the rush to spend their vacation on a real honest-to-God old-time farm." Out of a clump of bushes down the hillside burst a shining thing that chattered and gurgled and screeched, blades flashing, a crane-like arm waving. "What the—" asked Adams. "It's that dad-burned lawnmower," yelped Gramp. "I always knew the day would come when it would strip a gear and go completely off its nut.